unaware the pregnant wife he divorced was the multi-billionaire owner of the company her entire family worked for. His mother poured dirty water on her at family dinner as husband and mistress laughed. What she did shocked him and left his mother devastated. The night Marcus Morrison's mother Linda poured a pitcher of dirty dishwater over his pregnant ex-wife Elena at their family dinner should have been their final humiliation of the woman Marcus had divorced 6 months ago for being a nobody. But what Marcus didn't know, what his mother Linda didn't know, what his mistress Sarah didn't know as they laughed and filmed the foul water dripping down Elena's face and soaking her 5-month baby bump, was that the pregnant wife Marcus had divorced was actually Elena Caldwell, the secret multi-billionaire owner and CEO of Caldwell Global Holdings, the massive corporate empire that employed Marcus's entire family. Every paycheck Marcus's mother Linda received as executive assistant, every dollar his father Gerald earned as senior VP, every bonus Marcus collected as regional director, every commission his mistress Sarah made as director of client relations, all of it came from the company the pregnant wife Marcus divorced actually owned, the company that paid for the very house where Linda had just poured dirty water on the pregnant billionaire wife, where Marcus and his mistress laughed at the woman who signed their paychecks, where the entire family mocked the multi-billionaire owner they were completely unaware was standing dripping in their foyer, carrying Marcus's child, but Elena didn't scream or cry as the dirty water and potato peels slid down her simple dress onto the Italian marble floor of her own company's house. She just placed one hand protectively over the baby bump Linda had called a burden, pulled out her phone with the other, and made a single quiet call that would devastate Marcus's mother, shock Marcus to his core, and destroy everything his entire family had built on the fortune of the pregnant wife he'd divorced without ever knowing who she really was. What was Elena about to do to the mother who just poured dirty water on a pregnant billionaire? How would Marcus react when he discovered the pregnant wife he divorced owned the company his entire family worked for? Why was his cousin Rebecca suddenly screaming, "No, Elena, please don't, not them too," as if she'd witnessed this exact devastation before? And what did the mistress Sarah not know about the jewelry she was wearing and the pregnant wife she'd just laughed at while Marcus's mother poured that dirty water? The Morrison family home in Westchester Hills had always represented everything Linda Morrison believed she deserved. Crystal chandeliers, imported marble, designer furniture arranged just so. The kind of house that screamed success to anyone who walked through the door. And tonight, surrounded by her family at the mahogany dining table, Linda had felt powerful, in control, ready to handle the Elena problem once and for all. She'd invited her former daughter-in-law under the pretense of discussing the baby's future. But Linda's real plan was simpler, crueler. She wanted Elena to sign papers giving up any claim to Marcus's life, his money, his future. She wanted the girl gone, erased, like she'd never existed. Elena had arrived exactly on time, wearing that same plain dress she always wore. No jewelry except a simple gold band on her right hand. No makeup, hair pulled back in a basic ponytail. Everything about her screamed ordinary, forgettable, beneath them. Linda had felt vindicated just looking at her. This was the woman Marcus had wasted 3 years on. This plain, quiet nobody who couldn't even dress properly for a family dinner. Marcus sat at the table next to Sarah, his new girlfriend, and the contrast was stunning. Sarah wore a designer dress that hugged every curve, diamond earrings that caught the light, that gorgeous necklace Marcus had given her last month. She looked like success, like ambition, like everything Elena had never been. Gerald, Linda's husband, sat at the head of the table in his tailored suit, looking every inch the senior VP he'd worked 30 years to become. Their son Marcus radiated confidence in his expensive watch and Italian shoes. Even Rebecca, Linda's niece who'd been living with them since her own divorce 6 months ago, looked put together despite her recent struggles. And then there was Elena, simple, plain, pregnant, standing in their foyer like she didn't belong, because she did in single quotes t. Linda had felt a surge of righteousness as she stood from the table. She'd spent all afternoon making her signature pot roast, and the water from boiling potatoes still sat in the sink, murky and gray with starch and peels floating on the surface. And as she looked at Elena standing there with that slight swell in her belly, that baby bump that Marcus wanted nothing to do with, something inside Linda had snapped. This girl had tried to trap her son, had tried to use pregnancy to keep her hooks in Marcus when he'd clearly moved on to someone better, had shown up at their home uninvited, unwanted, trying to claim some connection to a family that had already rejected her. Someone needed to show Elena her place. Someone needed to make her understand that she meant nothing to them, that her baby meant nothing, that she was nothing. Linda had walked to the kitchen, grabbed that pot of dirty dishwater with both hands, marched back to where Elena stood in the foyer, and without hesitation, without mercy, poured every drop over Elena's head. The water had cascaded down Elena's face, soaking her hair, running down her simple dress, potato peels sliding down her shoulders to land at her feet on the Italian marble floor. The smell of starch and old vegetables filled the air. The sound of water splashing seemed to echo through the suddenly silent house. And then Sarah had started laughing. Loud, delighted laughter that filled the room. She'd pulled out her phone, already filming, capturing every second of Elena standing there dripping, humiliated, destroyed. "Oh my God." Sarah had gasped between laughs. "This is perfect. This is exactly what she deserves. Marcus, babe, your mom is savage. I love it." Marcus had joined in the laughter then, his face flushing with something that looked like relief, like he'd been waiting for permission to fully reject Elena, and his mother had just given it to him. "Mom, that's brutal," he'd said, but he was grinning. "But yeah, maybe she'll get the message now. Maybe she'll finally understand that we don't want her here." Gerald had said nothing, but Linda saw approval in his eyes, the kind of grim satisfaction that came from watching justice being served. Linda had set the empty pot down with a satisfying clang, feeling righteous and powerful. "There," she'd said, her voice sharp with vindication. "Now you know what we think of you, Elena. Now you understand your place. You're nothing. Your baby is nothing, and you need to leave our family alone." But Elena hadn't reacted the way Linda expected. She hadn't cried or run away or begged for mercy. She just stood there, water dripping from her hair, potato peels sliding down her shoulders, and placed one hand protectively over her stomach. The other hand reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, and she smiled. That strange, knowing smile that made Linda's stomach suddenly clench with inexplicable dread. Something was wrong. Something in Elena's eyes, in the way she held herself despite the humiliation, in the absolute calm on her face as dirty water dripped onto the marble floor. And then Rebecca screamed. Linda's niece, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner all night, suddenly stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "No, no, Elena, please, please don't do this. I'm begging you." Linda spun toward Rebecca, confusion spiking into irritation. "Rebecca, what are you talking about? Sit down." But Rebecca was crying now, real tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she stared at Elena with pure terror. "She's going to destroy us, just like James destroyed us. Oh God, Marcus, what did you do? What did you do? What is she talking about?" Gerald demanded, moving toward Rebecca. "Rebecca, explain yourself right now." But Rebecca couldn't speak anymore, could only cry into her hands while Elena pressed a single button on her phone and brought it to her ear. "Hello, James," Elena said, her voice calm and clear despite the dirty water still dripping from her chin. "Yes, it's time. Initiate the Morrison protocol we discussed. All of them. Effective immediately." The name James hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice because he knew that name. Everyone who worked at Caldwell Industries knew that name. James Caldwell, the billionaire CEO who'd destroyed Rebecca's life 6 months ago. Marcus watched his cousin Rebecca collapse into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, and suddenly fragments of memory started clicking together in his mind. Rebecca had been married to someone named James. Rebecca had lost everything in her divorce. Rebecca had never explained why, had just moved into their guest room broken and silent and refusing to talk about what happened. And now Elena was calling someone named James. Elena, who stood dripping with dirty water in their foyer, smiling that terrifying calm smile. Elena, who'd just said something about a Morrison protocol, like she'd planned this, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Who are you calling?" Linda demanded, her voice shrill with confusion that was rapidly morphing into fear. "Who is James? What protocol?" Elena lowered her phone slowly, deliberately, her eyes moving across each of their faces. Marcus felt pinned under that gaze, saw something in her expression he'd never noticed in 3 years of marriage: power, authority, the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself, because it already knew its own weight. "I'm calling my brother," Elena said simply. "James Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries. The man your daughter Rebecca was married to before she divorced him for being too quiet, too private, too unwilling to show off his wealth in ways she found acceptable." The room tilted. Marcus heard his mother gasp, heard his father make a strangled sound, heard Sarah's phone clatter to the floor. "Your brother," Marcus heard himself whisper. "James Caldwell is your brother. Half-brother, technically," Elena corrected, her hands still resting protectively on her stomach. "Same father, different mothers. We inherited our father's empire together when he died 8 years ago. James got Caldwell Industries. I got Caldwell Global Holdings." The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. Caldwell Global Holdings was where they all worked, where his father was senior VP, where his mother worked as executive assistant, where Marcus himself held his director position, where Sarah worked in client relations. Caldwell Global Holdings, the massive corporation that employed hundreds of people and generated billions in revenue annually. The company run by the mysterious E. Caldwell, who never made public appearances, who worked remotely, who was famously private about their identity. P. Caldwell, E for Elena. "No," Marcus said, but his voice had no conviction. "That's not possible. You worked some entry-level position. You had no money. You lived in that tiny apartment before we got married. You drove an old car. You wore cheap clothes. You were nobody. I was testing you," Elena said, and her voice finally cracked with emotion, real pain bleeding through the calm exterior. "I watched my brother James fall in love with your cousin Rebecca. Watched her be ashamed of him because he didn't flaunt his wealth. Watched her divorce him because he wouldn't change who he was to satisfy her ego. And then I met you at a company event, Marcus, my company event, and I thought maybe you'd be different. Maybe you'd love me for who I was, not what I had." She paused, and Marcus saw tears mixing with the dirty water on her face now. "But you were exactly like Rebecca, ashamed of me, embarrassed that I didn't drive a sports car or wear designer labels or want to show off. You wanted a trophy, not a wife. You wanted someone like Sarah, who measures worth in jewelry and Instagram posts and how expensive the restaurant is." Sarah made a choking sound, her hand flying to the diamond necklace at her throat. "That necklace you're wearing." "Sarah," Elena continued, her gaze shifting to Marcus's mistress. "Marcus gave it to you, didn't he? Told you he bought it specially for you?" Sarah nodded mutely, her face draining of color. "I bought it 3 years ago," Elena said flatly. "For myself, with my money. Marcus took it from our safe after I filed for divorce. So you're literally wearing my jewelry while laughing at me in my own house, after sleeping with my husband, while working for my company without even knowing it." The front door opened without anyone knocking, and James Caldwell walked into the Morrison home like he owned it, tall, composed, wearing jeans and a simple jacket, but carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room instinctively step back. He moved straight to Elena's side, his eyes taking in the dirty water still dripping from her hair, the potato peels on her shoulders, the protective hand she had on her pregnant belly. "Little sister," James said softly, and his voice carried more menace in those 2 words than any shouting could have achieved. "Are you all right?" "No," Elena answered honestly, her voice breaking, "but I will be." James put his arm around her shoulders, then turned to face the Morrison family with eyes that had gone absolutely cold. 6 months ago, Rebecca taught me something valuable. She taught me that some people will never value character over appearance, that some families raise their children to be cruel to anyone they perceive as beneath them. And tonight, you've taught my sister the exact same lesson." Gerald found his voice first, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Mr. Caldwell, please, we didn't know. We had no idea Elena was your sister, that she owned Caldwell Global Holdings. If you'd known, you would have been kind." James interrupted, his voice cutting. "That's exactly the problem, Gerald. Kindness shouldn't depend on someone's bank account. Respect shouldn't be conditional on their status. But you poured dirty water on a pregnant woman because you thought she was nobody important. You laughed at her. You filmed her humiliation. You called her unborn child a burden." Linda was crying now, mascara running down her face as reality crashed over her. "Please, we made a mistake. We'll apologize. We'll make it right." "You can't make this right," Elena said, stepping away from James's protective arm to stand on her own. "You had 3 years to be kind to me, Linda. 3 years when I was married to your son. 3 years when I cooked dinners for this family, attended your events, tried to be the daughter-in-law you wanted, and you treated me like garbage the entire time because I didn't meet your standards of success, because I dressed simply and drove an old car and didn't brag about money." Marcus moved toward her, his face stricken. "Elena, please, I loved you. I didn't know. If I'd known who you really were, you would have stayed married to me," Elena finished, and there was such pain in her voice that Marcus actually flinched. "You would have loved me for my billions, but not for myself. That's exactly why I never told you. Marcus, I wanted you to love me, not my money. But you couldn't even manage basic respect when you thought I was ordinary." Their phones started ringing simultaneously. Gerald's first, then Linda's, then Marcus's, then Sarah's. All 4 of them stood frozen, staring at their buzzing phones like they were snakes about to strike. "Answer them," James said calmly. "That will be HR from Caldwell Global Holdings. They have some news for you." Gerald answered with shaking hands, his face going from pale to gray as he listened. Linda answered next, her sobs getting louder with every word she heard. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stared at his phone until it stopped ringing and went to voicemail. Sarah dropped hers completely, backing away like the device had burned her. "Terminated," Gerald whispered, lowering his phone, effective immediately. 30 years with the company, and I'm just terminated. They said the CEO personally ordered it." "Me too," Linda gasped. 8 years. 8 years I worked as executive assistant, and I'm fired. Just like that. And they said security will be waiting if we try to enter the building." Marcus finally answered his voicemail, listening with growing horror. When it ended, he looked at Elena with devastation written across every feature. "I'm fired. My entire team, my projects, everything I built gone. And they said there's a file. Documentation of hostile work environment, harassment of a pregnant employee, misuse of company resources." He paused, his voice breaking. "The pregnant employee was you. You documented everything. Every cruel comment," Elena confirmed. "Every family dinner where you mocked my clothes. Every time your mother called me worthless. Every occasion your father suggested I wasn't good enough for this family. I documented all of it because I kept hoping you'd change, kept hoping you'd see me. But you never did." Sarah's phone rang again, and she answered it with trembling hands. Whatever she heard made her legs give out, sinking to the floor as she stared at Elena in absolute horror. "I'm fired too, and they're suing me for the jewelry. They said it's stolen property. They said Marcus gave me items that belonged to his ex-wife, and that's theft." She looked at Marcus with pure hatred now. "You idiot. You told me she was nobody. You destroyed my career for nobody. This house," James said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, "is company property, part of Gerald's compensation package. Since Gerald no longer works for Caldwell Global Holdings, you have 24 hours to vacate. There's a clause about termination for cause resulting in immediate forfeiture of housing benefits." Linda let out a wail of despair. "We have nowhere to go. This is our home, our life. Everything we've built was built on my sister's money," James said flatly. "Every brick of this house, every piece of furniture, every luxury you've enjoyed for the past 8 years since she took over the company. And you repaid her by pouring dirty water on her while she was pregnant with your grandchild." Elena placed both hands on her stomach now, tears streaming freely down her face mixing with the dirty water still in her hair. "I'm keeping my daughter, Marcus, and you're going to have no part in her life, no custody, no visitation, no relationship. I have documentation of abandonment, of you publicly mocking me while pregnant, of your mother creating a hostile environment. My lawyers assure me that terminating your parental rights will be straightforward. You can't, Marcus choked out. She's my daughter. I have rights. You gave up your rights when you chose cruelty over kindness, Elena said. When you divorced me while I was pregnant. When you brought your mistress to family dinners and laughed while your mother humiliated me. You made your choice, Marcus, and now I'm making mine. My daughter will never know the kind of people who judge worth by bank accounts and show cruelty to anyone they think is beneath them. Rebecca finally spoke from her corner, her voice broken and hoarse. I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you not to do this, but you wouldn't listen. Just like I didn't listen when people told me to value James, and now you've lost everything. Just like I did. Elena looked at Rebecca with something like sympathy. I'm sorry you learned this lesson too. I'm sorry my brother had to teach your family what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. James guided Elena toward the door, supporting her as she walked through the puddle of dirty water on the marble floor of her own company's house. At the threshold, Elena turned back one last time. I would have given you everything, she said to Marcus, her voice thick with tears and loss. I would have made you the happiest man alive, but you were ashamed of me from the start. You never wanted me. You wanted what you thought I should be, and that was never going to be enough. The door closed behind them, leaving the Morrison family standing in the ruins of everything they'd built on the fortune of the pregnant wife Marcus had divorced. Linda sank to the floor in her designer dress, surrounded by the crystal and marble and imported furniture. That would all be gone in 24 hours. Gerald stood frozen. 30 years of corporate climbing destroyed in a single phone call. Sarah clutched the necklace she'd have to return, her career over before it had really begun. And Marcus stood dripping with the realization of what he'd lost, who he'd thrown away, and the daughter he would never know because he'd chosen appearances over love, status over character, and cruelty over kindness to the woman who'd only ever wanted him to see her. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that challenge you to be better, kinder, and more aware of the worth in every person you meet. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever witnessed someone being treated differently once their true status was revealed? Your story matters. Share it below.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.